This is Brianna Shea,
And this is Andrea Castaneda.
and we are talking about the life and times and methodology of Phyllis Trible. Phyllis Trible was born in Virginia in 1932 and had a love for scripture from very early on. Her love extended particularly to the book of Jonah. In fact, in the preface to her book, Rhetorical Criticism, Context, Method, and the Book of Jonah, she writes that this particular book of the Bible fascinated, frightened, and filled her full. Due to this interest and passion regarding the subject in her college years, she was given the opportunity to study under James Muhlenberg and truly delve into studying the book of Jonah through the use of the method that Muhlenberg would later refer to as rhetorical criticism. This method has worked to shape and inspire Trible's life and has become the specialty that has made her the renowned and influential feminist theologian that she is.
Throughout her life, Trible has earned her title as a leading scholar in what has come to be known as feminist interpretation of biblical texts. She is an expert in literary and rhetorical methods of biblical criticism. She has been an incredible trailblazer for women in the fields of methods of biblical criticism, biblical studies, and theological thought. Trible earned her BA degree at Meredith College, a female Baptist seminary that has been committed to providing excellent higher education to women since its opening in the year 1899. After this accomplishment, she earned a Ph.D. with an emphasis in the Old Testament from Union Seminary, Columbia University in the year 1963. She later went on to hold many esteemed positions, from being appointed a professor at Wake Forest University, Andover Newton Theological School, Union Seminary, and even became the first woman to hold the position of Professor of Sacred Literature at Baldwin. She has held the presidency of the Society of Biblical Literature, and finally in 1998 left Union Seminary to pursue the deanship at the new Wake Forest School of Divinity.
Phyllis Trible is best known for God and the Rhetoric of Sexuality and Texts of Terror, two of her literary contributions which are considered groundbreaking in the field of feminist biblical scholarship. Perhaps one of the most accurate depictions of just how significant these books are to theological thought is her colleague Walter Bergemon's foreword in Trible's book, Texts of Terror. In the foreword, Bergemon describes Trible's work as unhindered in the sense that she focuses directly on the text by removing the limitation of the expositor or interpreter. With her feminist perspective, Trible, in her writings, works to balance out earlier imbalances and distortions of exegesis that may have come about in the biblical text. Trible follows a literary analysis which stresses rhetorical criticism, metaphor, and close reading. For Trible, the critique of culture was at the core of her feminist interpretation. These facts contribute to what has made her such a revolutionary Old Testament theologian. Her feminist perspectives are a fresh and much-needed reevaluation of texts that have often been perceived a certain way due to the biases of those who have previously evaluated them. Her thoughtful evaluation and careful research over the biblical text has made possible a more holistic understanding of an Old Testament theology.
It is important, before proceeding on an essay over the works and contributions of a feminist theologian, to address some of the terms that may be vague or even undefined. Possibly the most important term to be defined would be the actual term feminism. In an excerpt taken from Phyllis Trible's 5 Loaves and 2 Fishes, Feminist Hermeneutics in Biblical Theology, she examines the effects of sexism and patriarchy and the necessity for the conviction of feminism on these issues. Trible claims in this excerpt that feminism is the perspective that helps to challenge the paradigms of domination, not only within the paradigm of male over female, while it is the most common, but also in paradigms such as master over slave and even humankind over the earth. In essence, feminism is the belief of justice and equality, especially pertaining to equality within gender, but not constrained to it. Focusing more deeply on the issue of gender equality, Trible makes the important notion that when genders are seen as unequal, it is a sin because it undermines the integrity of creation in the image of God. This thought in itself provides the lens and framework with which Trible views the Old Testament, and therefore changes and affects everything accordingly.
It is important to have a good understanding of the thoughts and developments that have shaped the study of feminist theology in order to have a good sense of how it has been able to shape theology in the way that it has. It is important to note that the change in atmosphere that occurred in the theological realm that allowed for there to be an opportunity for theology to be discussed in more way than what at the time was considered to be the norm. For the early 20th century up until the year 1963, the theological agenda was mostly controlled by German Protestant scholarship. However, in the year 1963, this period came to an end, and with it brought the opportunities for biblical theology to converse with the world. This opened up the opportunity for feminist theology to have a voice in the theological arena and to finally begin to help shape and remold Old Testament theology as it was then known due to its white Christian males of European or North American extraction, educated in seminaries, divinity schools, or theological faculties, with patriarchal point of views, biases. Beginning in the 1970s, feminism has become a topic of great discussion with the realm of biblical studies. There have been many feminist biblical scholars who have utilized methods of studying the biblical text that have generally been tied to patriarchal interpretation but now used by women and have produced different results. Some of these methods include historical criticism, form criticism, tradition history, literary criticism, sociology, anthropology, archaeology, history of religions, and linguistics.
Methodology of biblical feminism varies in form, but is inspired by the importance of the fact that the goal is to articulate faith as disclosed in Scripture. Biblical feminism takes this goal as the basis for what it will do, and this shapes the ways that it will be used to do so. The first method that feminism utilizes is exegesis. This method is used in order to highlight neglected texts and reinterpret familiar ones. One specific example that perfectly exemplifies this importance can be found in Trible's book, Texts of Terror. In the first chapter of this book, Trible takes a close look at the story of biblical character Hagar. Trible does a careful and thorough exegesis of this narrative and is able to delve into the passage and present a deeper meaning that is clearly represented by the biblical texts, as a reading which highlights the injustice that was done to Hagar by Abraham and Sarai, a narrative that is not often portrayed in this light. It is critical, however, that light be shed on what is truly being disclosed within Scripture. One more example of the use of exegesis used by feminist theologians is found in The Flowering of Old Testament Theology. The book mentions a passage out of Hosea 11, verses 3 through 4 describe God the parent teaching Ephraim the child to walk, picking him up and feeding him. This is a perfect example of the influence of patriarchal assumption and perspective that has commonly been used to interpret the Bible, and thus neglected female depictions of deity. However, more thorough exegesis would highlight the fact that in ancient Israel, mothers performed those tasks. The second method that feminism utilizes is envisioning the contours and content of feminist biblical theology, which focuses upon the phenomenon of gender and sex in the articulation of faith. For example, feminist interpretation forms its theology of the Old Testament through viewing and analyzing the presence and significance of females within the biblical passages in order to grasp a more accurate interpretation of scriptures, not confined to former patriarchal biases. Finally, rhetorical criticism is the close study and analysis of a rhetorical document. When studying the Bible or any other document in this way, the reader looks at every aspect of the writing. The reader studies the structure and analyzes how the elements of the document communicate what is being studied. It also looks very specifically at the cultural and historical context of the reading. In doing this, the perspective and room for interpretation is widened.
Upon encountering facts such as the difference that it makes in the passage of Hosea when the verses are read with a feminist interpretation, and in becoming aware that a patriarchal perspective has shaped so much of what has shaped the entire Christian faith today, one must reckon with the truth that there is a real need for a renewed study of the Scriptures in light of this prior bias. It is in fact heinous that it becomes clear that there may have been some places in Scripture where the prior interpretations have been inaccurate and the study not be reawakened. This is the importance of a feminist biblical theology and a thorough execution of the methods that Trible is utilizing. The methods of rhetorical criticism, exegesis, and of contours and content that are utilized by Trible make her work all the more credible because they have also been the methods to be used by her male colleagues, but it is along with her feminist interpretation that they deliver fresh and invaluable results. As Trible so truthfully states, the hierarchy of male over female violates the integrity of creation in the image of God, male and female. Because of this truth, and because of the truth that is becoming obvious as more feminist theologians uncover previous and harmful biases to the interpretation of the biblical text, a feminist biblical theology is proving to be of the utmost importance. In light of the theologically accurate and responsible overtures that Phyllis Trible's method is aiding her to make, it is proving that her scholarship and presence as a female theologian are invaluable in the theological arena.
Recently, at the Church of the Nazarenes preaching conference held at Nazarene Theological Seminary, Carla Sundberg, the newly elected female president of the university, made the insightful and powerful statement that it is a shame to see that women have made incredible contributions in the fields of business, medicine, science, and many of the like, and yet have often been stunted within the church. Sundberg presents the declaration that the church has been surpassed in this area and that it is a true shame. A feminist theology that accurately represents females within the Bible, and a church that fully and completely supports this, is a church that can continue to be relevant and speak to the generations of today. The church cannot be behind the rest of the world in such an important issue of justice and equality. It is simply unacceptable. This is the cry of many women like Phyllis Trible, who devote their entire lives' work to see this become a reality within the church today.